Good evening to everyone. We have an exciting agenda tonight, or at least a lengthy one, and glad everyone is here. We are going to first look at the agenda. We have a couple of changes that we need to look at. And the first agenda is that the statement of accounts will be moved to the next meeting due to mechanical difficulties. And the second is under the action items of number 6, when the communications subcommittee reports, they are going to put forth a motion, and there will be a motion to approve what they're presenting to us. So those are two changes that we need to vote on right away to change our agenda, unless there's some questions about those.
I move to approve the changes to the agenda.
Thank you. Second for that? Thank you, Sherry. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hands. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We'll now move to approving the minutes. Were there any questions or changes to the minutes? There being no changes or adjustments to the minutes, is there a motion? Sangeeta?
Motion to approve the minutes?
Thank you. Is there a second? Jen, thank you. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hands. And again, it's another unanimous acceptance. We have comments from the public, and to ensure the public's right to be heard, the board has set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes are allotted to each speaker, and a maximum of 15 minutes to each subject. Is there anyone who would like to speak this evening? There being no one wanting to speak this evening, we'll then move to the reports and recognition. And would you like to start this? Would you have an introduction to South?
Yes, very briefly. While working diligently to put the budget and all these documents together, we've also been moving forward with our South building proposal and project, and Nancy's just going to give us a quick update as far as where we are with that process.
Okay, well, I'm pleased to announce that the Phase 2, that is the bid for the actual windows and the install of those windows, has been sent out to bid. The bid, which is NCPS 2015-01, will have a bid opening of February 10th. At 11 a.m. at the board office, and SLAM, as well as Bill Silver and his team, will be there as we open, and we will expect a fairly quick turnaround so that we can bring a recommended contract forward to the Board of Selectmen for approval. We are having a non-mandatory walkthrough on Monday, January 26th at 3:30. That is after school is out. Again, Steve Smith from Silver, Petroselli and Associates will be there, as will Bob Willoughby, so that any interested vendors can take a look around and see what is entailed. Also, you should note that both Jean Terone and Bill Silver have been reaching out even before we went out to bid to potential vendors, just to let them know we were going to be out on the street, and that as people start scheduling their work for the springtime, we wanted to get in as part of their interest as well. So moving along.
That sounds terrific. Are there any questions or anything anyone wants to ask about? It's been a very smooth project, and thank you to everybody that's on the committee and the chair, and appreciate very much your work on it, Nancy. Second, we have the Board of Ed subcommittee updates, and we'll start first with, unless there's an introduction you want to No introduction, yes.
Well, back in the fall, we established Board of Education subcommittees to do some specific work, and our Communications Committee, interestingly enough, has been now almost exactly 1 year in existence. So we thought it'd be a good time for an update for the board and others around some of the work that the committees have been doing. And I know also we have the Communications Committee charter to move from a special committee to a standing committee, and to have discussion about that as well. So whoever would like to begin.
Sherry, as the chair, are you presenting this?
Yes, sure. I'll start. So I'm currently chairing the Board of Ed Communications Committee, also with Ms. Appel and Ms. Richardson. And as Dr. Lutzy mentioned, per our update at the November 17th meeting, our special committee term has expired, and we are therefore seeking approval as a standing committee for a term of up to 3 years. The proposed committee charter was distributed to board members in the Friday notes. I do have one amendment from Penny Ration, and then I just think we're looking to make a motion on that. And then Jen is going to give an update on our website. Should I read the amendment from Penny?
That sounds like a good idea.
So just the amendment, the proposed amendment for the Communications Committee charter in the scope and composition is to say that the committee will be comprised of at least 3 Board of Ed members who will be appointed by the chair of the board in accordance with the provisions of Article 3, Section 5 of the BOE bylaws. Committee members will serve for 1 calendar year from appointment.
Does anybody have any questions about that proposal first? Scott?
Is there a limit to the number of terms that any committee member, and should that be addressed? I mean, they're 1-year terms.
Right. So I believe this proposed amendment was made to be consistent with the Board of Ed bylaws.
Right. Actually,
Yes.
my question was, I added, you had the committee members will serve for 1 calendar year from appointment. And I was just wondering about your thought on that. Because sometimes it's good to stagger it so you don't have everybody coming off all at once. But I figured you could, if they're only 1-year appointments, you can kind of handle the staggering.
Do you have any suggestions that you want to make on it? Anybody on the committee, please speak about any preferences you want on that, or recommendations.
I mean, I guess my question would be, do we want to be consistent across all committees in terms of how we handle the membership?
I think it can be specific to the committee. I don't think it has to be the same.
Okay.
I think different committees are gonna find that their scope is different in length as well, so
Okay.
it makes sense to do it the other way. But I just think if there is no term limit, then that's fine. But if there is, if we have one in mind, then we should specify it in the.
Right. I mean, from my perspective, I don't think we need a term limit, and I think the proposed amendment is good in that, a person can sign up for 1 year, and then if someone else wants to come on who has other new ideas for the Communications Committee, we can change the members around after that every year.
So it does have that built-in flexibility to allow people to move in and out, with a maximum then of 3 years for counting the first year. Would that be correct?
You lost me.
Oh, it's a 3-year charter.
Right.
And so 3 years there, and then they've had 1 year that they've served, so a total of 4.
Right. Do you perceive that after 3 years, the committee will go away? Or would?
Well,
We talked about that actually, because, right now we've been establishing new protocols and, redesigning the website, figuring out how to utilize web and texting and et cetera. So we've talked about that maybe in 3 years, that will be more of a district-based job versus communicate, and we may not need a communications committee.
Well, yes, Brian just found something in the bylaws which will be helpful for us.
Sure. It says in the Board of Ed bylaws that a standing committee member may not be appointed consecutively to the same committee more than twice.
Oh.
And that standing committee assignments are effective for the term specified in the committee charter. So if we specify 1 year, and it's the 3 years, then that would mean any committee member could be 2 of the 3 years.
Okay.
Given
Question,
that,
Jen?
maybe you'd
Yeah.
want to have the term be 2 years, and if somebody
Yeah, I
wanted to,
think
they
so.
could always resign.
Yeah.
Right, because otherwise we may not have enough people to cover.
Right.
And you want to have some kind of consistency because it is a new committee and we're
Right.
up and running until it gets established and whether it's something that's going to become long-term or not.
Right.
So you think the 2
I agree with
years,
that.
and Jen, you had a question?
No, no, no,
Got it.
no.
So you think that the, what the bylaws say would fit with this and be suitable?
Except that next year we'll have 3 new
Yes.
people, right?
Well, and
Yeah.
we'll see what happens at the end of the 2 years, or who's available and what's happening for different people, too. I think that always comes into it. And, yes, Allison?
I just want to say, if somebody could recall, we had this discussion about 2 versus 3, because again, if we say at least 3 members, if we don't have 3 members, that means we can't establish a committee. So I can't remember where we fell on that, our final.
We did it at
Decision.
least 2, because you can always have 3 or more, so that's
Right.
always kind of a
So I
safe.
think we should be consistent
Okay.
about that, too.
Okay, and were you suggesting that we finished on this and then had a report, or did you want to have the report on the
No, if
outline?
there's no more discussion, we can move to the report.
Okay, and so we need to have a motion for that? It's
Well,
on
we've
on
got a
our
motion.
agenda.
No.
A motion to approve the charter as a first read.
Yes, as a first read. That's the motion that we're putting
That's
on,
fine.
the one that we did
Okay,
put
I
on.
make the motion?
Yes.
Can I make the motion?
Yes, you
All right, I
certainly
make the
can.
motion.
All right, and
Approve
is there a
first read.
second for that? Thank you, Penny. And so we will bring that up at the next meeting and vote on it. Yes.
That was the
And
motion.
the next thing that we wanted to ask and hear about, of course, is the exciting things happening online on our site.
Right. So as part of our ongoing communication efforts, we have began redesigning the website, as you guys know, in May of 2014. Our goal really is to provide the New Canaan Public School District with an inviting, simple, concise website that would enable students, parents, teachers, and the community with updated, reliable information that's easily accessible. We formed a redesign team and gathered feedback from various stakeholders, students, teachers, curriculum leaders, website managers, and parents by holding focus groups and utilizing a lot of the questions that we did in the survey in October. And this enabled us to choose the best platform, layout, and content for our site. Our site in the initial stages, it's going to be launched February 1st. As you can expect, this has been a huge undertaking. And since it's been done in a relatively short amount of time, there are still aspects of the site that aren't going to be 100% complete on February 1st. Some of the pages and links won't be complete, and we're still transferring information over. Teachers, staff are still being trained. Until July 1st, both sites will be run kind of simultaneously until things can get transferred and streamlined. And then as of July 1st, our current site will go dark, and it will only be the School Wires site, which is the name of the new site, School Wires. So it's such a huge improvement. We're so excited. A big thank you to Brian Letzi and to Rob Miller, Susan Kelly, the website managers at all the schools, all the parents, focus groups, et cetera. A lot of hard work has been done, and it's such an improvement, and it's really going to help with our communications. So we're really excited.
This is very exciting. Anyone have any questions about the new site and what will be there? Well, I have a thank you for all 3 of you for the wonderful work that you've done on this committee. A lot of meetings and a lot of good ideas, and it looks as if with the charter, the things that you're planning for next year are going to be just equally as exciting. So thank you for your time and all of your efforts. Really appreciate it. Now moving to our next discussion is going to be, we have another report of a subcommittee, which is Mr. Goodman talking about explaining about what's happening with policies.
Okay, let me get up my notes. A little background. One is, it's called a committee, but I don't believe it is, as it's a committee of one. And in this case, it has not been a year. I only started looking at this basically in late October, when a lawyer for Shipman and Goodwin became available to discuss this. Could have even been November. But anyway, the original effort was proposed updating those policies which both the board and the administration felt were substantially out of date. With the previous governance committee, this was to be an ongoing effort, I believe, typically of 2 to 6 policies a year. To provide some perspective, there are approximately 132 board policies and 74 Shipman and, I'll call it S&G policies. I've spent some time reviewing our policies as well as the samples, S&G samples. Additionally, I've had 2 meetings with Mrs. Hobbs and Dr. Luzzi to review my findings. With regard to the statutory policies, it was hoped that we could just identify these, replace ours with theirs, and most importantly, When the statutory requirements change, just update our policies with the S&G supplied replacement policies. That was kind of the effort or the intent. While there are a number of one-to-one matches, this is often not the case. Additionally, the S&G approach is not always ours. For an example, policy 5160, student discipline, ours is 10 pages, theirs is 26 pages. And I don't know if you recall the bullying policy and the health policy, but it gets rather, your eyes kind of get numbed and glaze over, which is why this is not a committee but an effort of one. We have also found that in a number of cases, the off-the-shelf policies may not be best for us. Coming back to the 5160 policy, which is student discipline, when I showed our superintendent the off-the-shelf policy, his comment was along the lines of, when I first came to New Canaan and I saw that the New Canaan policy was 10 pages long, he thought that was rather long. The off-the-shelf policy is 2.5 times longer. Additionally, we also found there are some inconsistencies in the off-the-shelf policies. Well, where are we? Given the above, it is not clear that the hope of simply replacing policies with new ones as they are developed is realistic, especially keeping in mind that we strongly prefer a solution that is less manpower intensive in the future, i.e., we don't have to identify which one matches, what the differences are. We can get to a point where we say, okay, policy 3862, new one, put it in. There are questions that's not clear that that will be where we or can end up. There are also questions concerning the dollar and manpower cost of such an effort, as well as its priority versus the original need to identify high priority policies that we want to change rapidly. Next steps. Given the above, we feel it would be prudent to explore CABE's model policies approach, as well as contact a few districts that believe they have their policies under control. Such one candidate is the Berlin district, where the board chairman gave our own board a workshop 2 years ago, including discussing the issuance of governance. Currently, we do not have a timeline for this effort, as there are still unresolved issues relating to how realistic our expectations are, as well as questions regarding dollar costs and manpower requirements. As an example, we were told that Darien had worked on this issue for a few years, stopped, and after a few years recently started up again, but have no fixed schedule at this time. So we're not really progressed very far, except that we realize we have a number of issues we have to understand better. We have to reach out to some other resources to see how they might be addressing this, get together again and present findings again. Any questions?
Any questions?
Probably too vague to be any questions.
Well, after listening to, as he said, we had a meeting about this and discussing it where Jean was quite helpful in showing us the difference between these different policies and why it was not just a simple matter of saying, we'll take this one and put it right in. And we looked at the things and realized that it may not mesh with things that we've had in place or what we think should be in place. And so do we cut it? Do we add to it? So it's not quite as simple as we thought it would be, as many tasks start out looking that way. They're going to be easy, but this one is really a Herculean when you start looking at it. I see Mrs. Rashin really smiling with it because she's familiar with the law and policies and knows what we're talking about. The wording is important.
Well, we're trying to find to see if there's a non-Herculean way of going about it, and that's taking some time to explore. And
Yes.
we don't know where we'll come out on that issue.
Well, we appreciate very much all your efforts, Jean, and are grateful for what you're doing for us. Thank you. Those are the two of the committees that are going to report. There'll be 2 more reports at the next meeting or in the future, depending on what those committees are reporting back to us. Moving now to our next agenda item, which is the superintendent's proposed budget, the second read, which, as you can see from the changes that we've made, have broken this down into different parts, and I think you have an introduction for us to go through.
Absolutely. Where on the 5th, we approved the budget in its totality with one motion. What we've done tonight was break it into 4 different motions so that we can discuss the operating budget and then the capital facilities budget, capital technology budget, and the capital fleet replacement budget, each individually as needed. So I thought we'd start with the operating budget, which is currently at $84,809,121. It has been moved and seconded from the 5th. So we'll begin that discussion and then have our vote and determine where we go with that, and then move on to the next, as we go. I thought I'd just hit a couple of highlights on the operating budget, if that's okay.
Oh, yes.
Just prior to jumping into the discussion. The proposal includes, as we discussed last week, the full funding of the insurance liability in anticipation of upcoming conversations with the different town bodies. So this funding constitutes 1.6 million of the increase, which is 2% of the overall 4.87% increase. And you notice that 4.87 is down a little bit from the 5%, and we'll share that with you in a little bit. The budget also fully funds the outplacement costs as a gross number without subtracting out the anticipated excess cost grant reimbursements, which is expected to be approximately $600,000 or 0.75% of the overall increase. And this is until we reach agreement with the town regarding the management of this same-year reimbursement grant, which we've discussed. The salary budget, which is 1.55% of the overall budget increase, includes 2 additional teachers at Saks in the 7th grade due to enrollment, 2 supervisory aides, and 1 custodian also at Saks, and also due to the enrollment increases. Additionally, a new teacher, 1 teacher for the elementary level, remains in the budget. Right now, it's pegged at South, but the precise location would be unknown until the summer. In addition, a 0.5 FTE for the district social worker due to increasing expectations on school climate initiatives and other state mandates is included in this amount. The new positions total approximately $359,000, or 0.4% of the 1.55% increase in that salary line. Salaries are going up 2.35% year to year. And we'll talk through the revised budget packet that you received tonight when you came in as well. As we discussed on January 5th, we've also put together a deferred list. The deferred staffing consists of the 0.5 writing specialist at West Elementary, 3.0 general education TAs, and student deans at the elementary, middle, and high school. These deferred positions total approximately $255,000, and they may appear in future budgets based on need and feedback from the schools and from the board going forward. Goal 5 of our district goals, stewardship, remains an important focus for the district as well. We've added a slide into the stack that we'll be presenting going forward to illustrate some of the ways we continue to review and refine our programs to ensure maximum efficiency and benefit from all of our resources. This includes initiatives like adding RAM and solid-state hard drives to existing computers to extend their useful lifespan, energy efficiency programs at all of our schools, and some of the many staffing efficiencies we've taken through the years, such as the move to the 6-day rotation that we've put in place, using FLES teachers to tutor our English language learners during the day, and reallocating staff wherever possible to meet enrollment needs. One of the more difficult decisions thus far has been what to do about the request of the squash team for funding. So this current budget right now does not include money for funding squash, as it is an unsanctioned sport with the FCAC and the CIAC. Sanctioned sports are required to follow the CIAC handbook, which articulates ground rules for student participation in athletics, such as eligibility, recruiting, and other things. They're unsanctioned club sports at this time because of the lack of local competition and an ill-defined season length. It doesn't necessarily fall neatly within the winter, spring, or fall seasons with our student athletes. However, we continue to honor the efforts of students who participate in all club sports by giving those students the opportunity to earn a varsity letter and by recognizing their accomplishments at the Senior Athletic Awards Picnic each year. Additionally, the high school going forward will work with the squash club to help them to define an executive board and parent organization, which in turn will help create sustainability for the program. The last piece, and then we'll get into discussion and board to consider different things. After reviewing our 3-year usage patterns, the town's building and fleet superintendent informed us we could reduce our heating fuel budget by $103,000. So this updated budget has taken that $103,000 into account and accounts for some of that reduction. Nancy, do you want to talk about the packets that everyone received tonight with the updated printouts?
Basically, as we had mentioned at the first read, we were still working on making sure that staff are projected in the right account codes, and we're still in the process of doing that. What we've done is reprint the entire budget because it was a whole lot easier than trying to deal with, well, replace page 10, replace page 15, so it was just so much easier to just give you a whole new book. What you'll see is that the changes are probably more evident in the cost center pages when you look at them, because salaries and benefits have shifted based on some updated accounting of that. Again, the dollars remained the same, but some of the cost centers went up, some went down, some of the benefits went up and down based on changes to the salaries as well. You will also see, for instance, when Frank and I were looking at some of the projections, we had, just for example, an adaptive PE person who was listed as a regular teacher, when in fact an adaptive PE teacher is a special ed teacher. So that's the kind of fine-tuning that we're continuing to work on as we move forward in our whole new database. So basically, that's the change. It just was off a whole lot easier to give you the whole book. We also included at the back of the book the updated 5-year capital forecast, an updated, on page 122 or 123, is the updated tech plan, as well as I had handed out a single sheet for the fleet 5-year capital plan, so now it's in the book as well. And then, of course, under the property services, that in the fuel and utilities line page, we reduced the $103,000. So basically, the changes are the dollars and cents, well, the dollars moved around for both salaries and benefits in the cost centers and in between certain account codes, such as from regular teachers to special ed teachers and that sort of thing. But the dollars remained the same as we had indicated it would.
Are there any questions that anyone wants to ask? Once again, the finance department are superstars, putting out information and using the new Munis really in a wonderful way.
Well, again, I'd like to remind everyone that it has been a process. It will continue to be a process, and it is not just the finance department. The business office and the human resources department have been working on this for months, and will continue that effort over the next several months as we really delve into what position control means, and we're able to continue to fine-tune. So it truly is a team effort. Gary's team, my team, they have been working in a collaborative fashion, and everyone has been working very, very hard.
Thank you to the whole team. Sorry I left anybody out to begin with. Compliments to you all. Any questions? Any discussion on any parts of the, yes. Sherry?
I'd just like to ask that we revisit the difficult decision regarding the squash funding. And I do acknowledge that this is a very difficult decision. But given our district's focus on educating the whole child, and given the important role that co-curriculars play in that goal, I would like to suggest, or I guess make a motion that we increase this operating budget by $20,000, and to address any concerns about the fact that we don't currently have a consistent process to allocate funds to non-FCAC or SEAC sports. I would suggest that we could put those funds into a student activity line item, until which time we can actually define a procedure or policy to afford that consistency. But I think that for all the reasons that the squash club presented, we've got a New Canaan High School varsity sport that's been in place for 8 years now. They've got currently 47 high school students playing the sport, co-ed sport, non-concussive sport. They've got an executive board already established, by the way. There was a note here that they do already have a board established. I think they outlined some very compelling reasons as to why we should consider this funding. So I just would put that out there for discussion.
Scott?
I certainly would second the motion. I would hope to make it even broader, such that it isn't so much, I think, and I don't mean to speak for Sherry, but that we want to earmark $20,000 for the squash club, because that isn't consistent with what we've been talking about. But I do think if we were to add $20,000 to our almost $85 million budget, it's insignificant, but it sends a very strong message to these clubs, be they athletic clubs or even academic clubs, that we do support what they're doing. We do think it's important. The ski club has come to us and asked us for money. We have deferred them year after year under the same basis that they're not a CIAC-sanctioned sport. The squash club has come to us, and we're supporting these clubs in every way except financially. We're recognizing them, we're supporting them emotionally, but we're not supporting them financially. And to expect that a kid continues to pay $1,500 or $2,000 a year to participate in a sport becomes really, even in a town like New Canaan, becomes really onerous. And I think that we need to make a statement that says that we do care about healthy choices for the kids. And we do care, if we're going to say that we care about the entire child, we need to put our money where our mouth is, in fact. And a $20,000 start is pretty small, but I think it's encouraging to those clubs. We can set up a set of criteria by which they can come and apply for the money. We're talking about, for the most part, maybe a coaching stipend or something like that, maybe some transportation money. And I think it's a very valuable and worthwhile endeavor.
We have a motion, and it's seconded. And more discussion on the motion? Yes.
I think, I agree. I think we need to encourage more participation across, extracurricular activities, and I think that's a wonderful goal of the district. I just, as I look at the deferred list of things that we're not doing, we have a .5 writing specialist at West, and, I kind of look to, sort of that $255,000 of deferred, sort of money that we're looking at in the district. I think we need to prioritize where the dollars are. And, I would probably say I would prefer to see that $20,000 spent on a writing specialist at Saks right now, and then I think maybe we're putting the cart before the horse. Maybe we put the policy in place of how we're going to handle these extracurricular activities, and then we fund them, instead of putting a pool there without a policy that we're reviewing as a board. And so I kind of look at budgets where I would like to see things in place prior to okaying the funding for something or putting the funding there. And I think we have bigger things that we're not funding this year, which are disappointing, I'm sure, to many parents in the district. So that doesn't minimize how important those activities are. I mean, I think they're wonderful. It's just there's not an unlimited pool of money, and we have to we're charged with the hard decisions of where do those dollars go. And I would say my view is those dollars, if they were going to be spent, my first choice might go elsewhere. So,
Jean?
Echoing a similar thought, and I suspect everyone would agree that we all would like to encourage these clubs to continue to function, perform their services, that the volunteers do are valuable, the kids are benefiting from this. I have some doubts, though, about just saying here's $20,000 or any amount when we don't even know what the amount's required. Mr. Gress mentioned $1,500 per kid. I don't know if we're saying that means 47 kids in this case is $75,000 that it takes to solve the problem. I don't know where the $1,500 comes from, and there are ski clubs, et cetera. So I hate to go down a path of saying we're going to fund this in some way and yet not even know whether $20,000 is adequate, or coming back, if we had the $20,000 to spare, would we spend it someplace else just as well? So I'm not in any way saying that the request is not legitimate. It is. It's a wonderful thing that they're doing. But putting the cart before the horse possibly is here. I know also when we get our budget through the various bodies, we're going to be coming back and saying, well, okay, where can we cut? What even without this request, we're going to be facing that issue of we don't have enough money perhaps to do everything we want to accomplish. So I would prefer to see some more information about this, and then we'll be revisiting the issue of do we have money to fund this or not, which I am for finding a way of doing it, but I don't know if this is the right way.
Are there any other opinions on this? Sangeeta?
No, I appreciate it. It's a tough to decide where the money gets allocated. These type of activities are part of school life. You know, although we say education, it goes beyond just, you know, books and reading. And oftentimes having these type of outlets helps someone be able to study and focus more. So it is important. One of the things I'm going to say is that, you know, although we're looking for things we would always love to add, like the writing special stuff, these are things that are actually happening right now, which we want to continue. So this is like reinforcing what we have and making sure that it's available for the kids and that it continues on success. So I kind of look at it a little bit differently than for something that we may be able to get if we had extra money there, but it's just to support the program. So I do think it's important for us to look and support these programs to make sure that they're available to everyone and it doesn't become limiting, that if that person doesn't have that much money, they're not allowed to do this particular activity because it's gotten beyond their means. I do think we need to develop the criteria and the policy in terms of who and at what level do they get the money. As far as whether we do it now before we develop the policy or do it, you know, it's hard with the timing of the year because we can develop policy, but then we can't act on it again for a whole year because we have to go through the budget cycle. So I can appreciate Sherry's and Scott's request to have that put in now so that we can have that available if that is our priority to fund those organizations. And as Scott mentioned, it's not just the athletic ones, but it's also the academic ones and other types of clubs. It's important for us to be able to, you know, support all that student life. So I'm, you know, up in the air in terms of whether, you know, we do the policy first versus put the money out right now. So I'd like to hear what the others on the board who haven't spoken to about what their thoughts are.
Okay. Jen?
I recognize again the difficulty in the decision of allocating the money, and you know I was so incredibly impressed by you know the kids that came in here and spoke. That the coach has been volunteering for 8 years to establish this program, and you know she wrote to all of us saying they're the #2 public high school squash boys team in the country, as well as the #1 team in Fairfield Westchester Public School League. So clearly they've reached a tremendous success and. You know, and I'm thinking that she's leaving. Is she leaving? The coach is retiring. So, you know, it's who's going to pick up the reins on this enormous thing that has been developed. And, you know, there's a lot of 47 kids in the high school alone that are in this program. And there's a ton at Saks. I mean, they're fueling the fire at Saks that are all coming in as well. And also just, you know, again, now I have a freshman at the high school. You know, freshman year, you know, it's great getting involved, and it's not as difficult, I don't think, getting on teams as a freshman. However, you know, once you hit sophomore year, it's a lot more difficult to, you know, go on to sports teams, and I think it's so great that there's, someplace else for kids to go, and, you know, I don't know about policy. I'd be happy to work on a policy. I mean, I don't know if we even have, like, a written policy, or if this is just something that we've done. the CIC rule, I mean, I don't know if, it's not written anywhere, is it? Or
It is.
It is written, okay. Well, I mean,
The
just
fact
think it's
that we
something that
don't
we should.
fund a sport that isn't CIAC qualified is written?
Where is it written?
Only CIC.
Where's that
I
written? Because
haven't
I was
seen that
looking for
anywhere.
it.
We're
I
fortunate that
looked
we
for
do
it
have
today.
someone here who may be able to
I
answer.
believe that's practice. I do not believe
Yeah, I'm
we have a policy
quite
on
sure.
that.
I couldn't
should
find
be
it
asked
today,
Jay.
so I don't know. I just think it's, and again, the $20,000, I don't think anyone's meaning that we're going to give the squash team $20,000. I think it's just, we have multiple people that come, and it would have to be something, again, we'd have to sit down and figure out how we'd allocate, because, there are, other CIC sports. So it wouldn't just be squash, but I would love for these kids to continue and to be able to have a coach.
Now, one question I had, though, is just in terms of a budget. Usually when you budget something, you have a specific amount that you are putting into it. You don't create just a fund to have access to. So if for some reason we develop a policy and we realize next year that we only are able to, only so many people meet the criteria, and we only allocate 15,000, I'm not sure if that's something that we can do through the budget process that way, if you don't have a set amount that you're going to be giving out. Just creating a certain amount.
Jean?
By the way, I would have no problem with the administration finding out more information, or the board finding out more information about what the actual need is, what the costs are. And as we do in many cases, the administration recommends moving funds from one line item to another as the year develops. For instance, if we pass this budget and we need 2 teachers down at the South or wherever, they will have to dig them up someplace, and obviously it'll be taken from someplace else as they tune their budget. So I don't see that if we say if we do not pass a resolution saying we want to add $20,000, which may have to be cut anyway, I don't see that as really the main thing. It may be a signal, but I would support if the administration came back and said, after they get a handle on where we're at, et cetera, and hear from these various groups and hear from the board as to what their priorities are, if in fact some needs of these clubs are funded. Obviously, it'll come from someplace else, but that's going to be the case anyway. You're always cutting here and supporting there. So I'm not against the club. I'm not against allocating monies to them once we know more, and I don't know that we have to, that it's dependent upon passing a $20,000 or any other number tonight, because that necessarily will have to come under scrutiny regardless.
Do we want to have Jay speak about anything? Jay.
Well, if there are questions for Jay, Jay Egan, our athletic director, he's here to, and be happy to answer any of them.
Is that, Jay, are there any, yes, comments first?
I just want to say that I appreciate everyone's comments, and Gina, I appreciate that suggestion. I do want to point out that I do think there is a principle. We're actually discussing a principle in that historically our practice has been to only fund the FCX, CX sports, which tend to be the popular sports. So I think what we're talking about here is there is, squash as an example, it's a rapidly growing, nationwide, it's a rapidly growing, healthy sport that we're not funding simply because it's not an FCX sponsored sport. And I think, this is an important discussion to have. Is that the right principle?
It is, and let's update our policy, which I agree is how to sync with the needs of the community.
Right. Penny?
Well, I was just wondering if, I know Darien has put some money toward their squash team, and I was just wondering if anybody had checked with them to know what their policy was.
Maybe, Jay, would you want to come to the microphone and help us on some of the other questions? Jay Egan, our athletic director.
Good evening. I have a budget comparison for schools in our DIRG. My colleagues and I put this together on a yearly basis. So what I know about Darien is that they fund squash, that participants in their squash program pay $825 per year to participate. So I did some rough numbers. I would assume that their numbers are similar to our numbers. So that would mean the cost of their program would be, the donated funding for their program would be about $38,775. I actually do have the squash team's budget because it's part of the student activity fund. So our squash team budget last year was $50,000. With 43 participants, that comes out to $1,100 per student. As I looked at this budget, there is $14,710 that was allocated to preseason court time. So that's before the season started. That was in October. They also had about $5,000 allocated to funding for Blue Streak conditioning, which is, everyone knows Blue Streak is a commercial conditioning program that a lot of our athletes use. So of that $50,000 that they have in their budget, $21,000 of that was for preseason court time and Blue Streak conditioning. So if I pull that number out of their total budget, the per pupil cost for the New Canaan athlete could be $624. Darienne's paying $850 right now. I don't know the specifics of their program, so I can't speak to that. If I may clarify one other point I heard in your discussion this evening, Liz Schmidt, who's done a masterful job with this program, building enthusiasm, she is like she is a manager. She doesn't actually coach the team. They pay their coaching. They pay retail costs at Chelsea Piers for their coaching and for their court time, and that's reflected in their budget as well. So Liz will be missed, and I don't know how we would replace her energy in the program, but she has a very important function, which is built. Her enthusiasm has built the program, but she's not the coach. So I mean, I have a little bit of information. I have. The other thing I guess I would just say, I mean, I can pass this out if you'd like it. So Darienne's athletic budget for the 2014-15 school year is $1,429,000. New Canaan High School's athletic budget for the 2014-15 school year is $980,000. So there's a significant difference, and I think some of that difference, just in looking at what Darienne identifies, is that they are funding some of these non-CIAC FCX sports. And, I think when we talk about championship programs in the FCAC and in Westchester County, again, not diminishing what the squash team has been able to do, but I think there's 3 teams in Fairfield County, 3 public high schools that have squash in Fairfield County. And so these are schools that are located within Fairfield County, and the majority of those schools are private schools. That's just for some clarity as information. Again, I'm in the same position as members of the board. I don't want to speak negative about a very positive activity, and I'm not here to do that.
Some questions. Deanna?
I have 2 questions. I'm never good with gross numbers because I know Darien is a bigger school than we are, and I'm pretty sure they have more athletes than we do as well. So do you have a better handle on a per student?
So I do.
Okay.
So I guess you're right, you're correct. Darien has 100 more students than we do. We both participate at about a 70% rate with respect to the student body. So that's probably the number, is about 70 athletes. So town budget, Board of Education allocation per pupil in Darien is $1,036, and in New Canaan is $775.
Is that per student athlete or per pupil?
It must be per pupil.
Okay. And then the other question I had was, so Darien is the only other FCAC school?
I think Greenwich does. I don't want to say I'm
Okay.
positive that they do, because I'm assuming
Okay.
that they do. I think
Okay.
that they do, because I think that, Liz and I have had a few conversations about this, and I believe that she mentioned Greenwich.
Okay.
I know Wilton doesn't,
Yeah.
so I don't know who else would.
Penny? Betty
I was
Rash.
just wondering if you look at if you look at Westport and Weston and some of the other schools that we really compare ourselves to, like Wilton as well, do any of them fund non-FCX sports? I mean, are we kind of an outlier in not funding it?
I know Wilton doesn't. Westport has a rugby program, which is not a CIAC-sponsored sport,
That they fund?
that they fund. You know, the accurate information is basically what I've given you, so I don't know the answer to that question as far as the scope of other programs that are funded, that are non-CIAC. I know the answers in Darien because that's our comparison. I know the answers in Wilton because that's our other direct comparison. Same situation.
What is sort of the history of the various programs that have not been part of the FCAC and that have then become part of, let's see, in order to be a program at the high school, they have to be part of it, is that correct?
The CIAC
Join it.
uses a percent participation in as far as the number of schools in the state and what percent, and I believe it's 25 or 30% of the schools in the state have to support a certain program before they will fund it, before they will endorse it or support it. So it's girls lacrosse actually was, I believe, 14 or 15 years ago they became a sport, and when that critical number across the state got to be within that percentage, and they were given that endorsement by the CIAC. Well, the CIAC is now going to govern it. It's really a matter of governance and rules and so forth. Boys volleyball, I believe, went that route as well.
Okay. Jen?
I just have a question. Clearly, squash is an expensive sport. You know, not every sport that, you know, is not an FCA, CIC, whatever sport is that expensive. But, like, I know we have a booster club with parent support. Do they ever give scholarships or anything like that to a student that would want to play squash that doesn't have the funds?
No, we haven't, because we've used the same guidelines there. We do for other students. We do for students within the sports that
are.
I know you're not crazy about this idea, but within the CIAC,
Right.
FCX-sponsored sports, the Booster Club does
Right.
give scholarships and actually has additional money set aside for students that are having, you know, temporary hardships with respect to team dues and so forth and things of that
Because
nature.
that would be helpful, clearly. You know, I mean, I don't know if that could ever change. But then also for coaching, like squash is expensive. Like, how much is there a number for the actual coaching? Like the dollars?
An average number for our coaches, for the
For squash.
the Board of Education funded coaches, I don't know that. I just know what they're.
I mean, clearly, we're not going to be, like, paying for Blue Streak and all that stuff. But I'm just wondering what the coaching costs would be. But anyway.
Allison?
Jay, are you aware, I think Wilton's a town that does this, but has a formal pay-for-play policy. I know we don't, but we have a very informal pay-for-play policy. Is Wilton alone in that, or are there other towns that you're aware of that have that
No,
same?
Wilton's not alone in that. I know that Ridgefield has that, in our DIRG, Ridgefield does. I believe Weston has some pay-for-play with a cap per family. So those schools do, I know that, based on the information that I have.
Can you explain that, just so, for those of us that don't know what you're talking about, the pay-for-play?
Maybe Jay?
Jay, could you explain what pay-for-play is?
Well, pay-for-play would mean that the family would pay a certain amount of money to offset the cost of the athletic program without any, this is not enrichment, this would be the basic cost of transportation, coaching, uniforms, not the additional coaching and the enrichment that the Booster Club provides for our programs at New Canaan. So that's basic participation you have to pay for. And it's pay to practice, not pay to play.
Yes, Scott?
So I think we're, as helpful as that is, we're getting a little off of the track because these sports are not able to get funding from the athletic department. That's our practice here. They're not able to get that funding. So how do they get the funding? How does the Model UN pay for the teacher that runs the Model UN? That money comes out of the Student Activity Fund. So if we were to say, and I would be more than happy to work with the administration on developing a policy that's fair and equitable for these kinds of clubs, I don't think that we need to have the policy in place. We have 6 months, we have 7 months before it's necessary to start to allocate money. We can put a policy in place very easily in that period of time, and qualified activities can come to us and ask for money. I don't think that, the squash, when they came to us and presented, they requested $20,000. I don't think we need to give them $20,000. Frankly, if I had made Sherry's motion, I would have made it for more. But the ski team has come to us multiple times over the years and asked for money, and we all just kind of kick the can down the road and go, well, I don't know, did you talk to Jay? Did you look at it? And we don't have the money. It's not in the budget, and it's an easy excuse. If we put $20,000 or more into the budget and say, there it is, apply for it, and we will begin to allocate it, it makes a statement. And if we can't find $20,000 in an $85 million budget for something as healthy as this, I think we've really lost our way.
Yes, Deanna?
I just have one other question, and maybe it's Jay. I know Crew is now a 501c3, and so they're independent of the school activities, or are they still under? Because I guess I still go back to the Crew analogy, where they're kind of where squash is today. I mean, they were in the same exact position 15 years ago, and they sort of all banded together and created a system where they have coaching and have a program that seems to work.
Can you help, can you give us some background on that, Jay? I
It's
think
very
that's the
expensive.
question.
It's very expensive to row Crew.
That's, well, let's,
But I mean, it's same
And I think
model.
about 20 years ago, they had brought this idea to town, and they actually, I've read it, they had a business plan in place with, I believe, the necessity of having 50 members participate in order to generate the revenue they needed for the coaches and for the equipment. And so they were they did a really nice job bringing the sport to the community, and they've really built the program to be, it sustains itself with the numbers of athletes they have from multiple communities now participating. And, I think it is an expensive sport, probably it's a lot like squash. They have never wanted to be under the umbrella of the athletic department because they're a multi-season activity. And we have no multi-season activities. That would be one thing that I would have a different attitude about this if we were saying that these were multi-season activities where we're going to monopolize a young person, not give them opportunities to do multiple sports. Crew, by the nature of that activity, that's not a bad thing, but they have a fall season and they have a spring season, so they want to be independent, and they've created, the fiscal means to do so with their programming.
are there other questions? Allison?
I just want to say no Board of Ed member looks forward to the night of the second read of the budget, because this is the night we have to make those very painful decisions, and this is one of them. And I think when the squash team came before us, they were incredibly impressive, just the sheer numbers of parents and the students who came here. I mean, let's face it, not one of us up here doesn't want to fund the squash team. We want our kids to be doing something healthy and active, and we've got a large group, and they've built momentum, and they've been very successful, and we want to support them. The question becomes, how do we support them? Now, we can say $20,000 isn't much in an $84 million budget, but the bottom line is, after tonight, every dollar is going to be a trade-off. Every dollar we spend on one thing, we're not going to be spending on something else. I would love to fund the squash team. I really would. Having said that, I understand the budget process, and I know that Brian's gone to every member of his administration and asked them to come back with a bare-bones budget, basically. So we have a lot of faculty, we have a lot of staff, and we have a lot of administration who weren't able to request things this year that they're probably in dire need of. And that's my hesitancy in doing this. It's not a CIAC sport. It hasn't been past practice. It's not a reason not to change our practice, but I think we really need to look at the policy first and decide as a board how we want to, if we want to develop a new practice, how we want to go ahead and do that. So as much as I hate to say it, I would not be in support at this point in time of putting another $20,000 into our budget for this. What I would ask, though, maybe as a board, we can look to Dr. Lutzy, and we can look to the principal of the high school, Dr. Leduc, and ask them to maybe look into the student activity fund, because if I recall correctly, when we set this up, there was some discretionary funding in the student activity fund. I believe we set it up such that if there were some clubs or things that kind of went out of existence, that money would roll into a discretionary fund that the principal of the school would be able to utilize, and correct me if I'm wrong, but would be able to utilize. And so perhaps we can ask the administration to take a look at those funds to see if there's anything there that at least we can use to continue the momentum of this very successful club. I don't know if that's possible, Brian, or not.
It's possible. Yep, that can be sometimes it's seed money for new clubs that are starting out. So it's not an awful lot of money. It's not like the amount that we're talking about here.
Right.
But it's something that can be certainly looked at and reported back to.
Okay, and then I would encourage us as a board, to Scott's point, we have been talking around this a little bit, so I would encourage us as a board to really sit down, develop a policy, decide what we want to do, and then move forth in a consistent fashion with all the non-CIAC or non-FCIAC sports or any other activities that we feel kind of fall into that bucket that's kind of outside the realm of what we do now, because obviously as a board, we want to encourage any healthy activities that we can for as many of our students as we can. So maybe as a board, we should take a look at that.
Any other? Let's move for the vote on the motion from the group about the squash funding. So do you want to repeat your motion again, Sherry, so we're all sure we have it in mind?
Sure. I move that we increase the operating budget by $20,000, the funds to be placed into the student activity fund, and a process to be defined for allocating those funds to non-FCIAC, SEAC sports and activities.
Just for precision's sake, when we talk about where it would go, there's a co-curricular stipends line.
Okay.
And that's the line item. I know we're
Okay.
talking about activity funds, and I make the mistake of thinking of them as one and the same around the curricular activities, but the addition would go into, under the certified salaries, you'll see a co-curricular line. That's currently at 732,602, and if the motion were to carry, that's where the $20,000 would be allocated.
So a vote
One
of...
more question or
Yes.
comment. I mean, it's one of the questions I have is if we only had $20,000, and so we could really only partially fund some of these activities, and it's something like, sports, does that, well, I'm a lawyer, so that, it creates questions for me. So one of the things I'm sitting here thinking about, does that mean that Jay now supervises that coach or doesn't supervise that coach?
Or
I
hires
think
the
they're all
coach?
types of kind of, they're really difficult kind of issues. My father was a squash champion, so I really want to fund this club. But I just having a really hard time understanding how we can do it without, I'd even be, if we thought we could work some of these things out quickly, I'd be, like in 2-3 weeks, I'd be sitting here thinking, well, maybe we should put the money in now, because otherwise we have to wait for another year, and we know we're going to get pressure. If we can't come up with the policy, we could take it out. Now that's, but I see partially funding a sport versus fully funding a sport seems to me to create a whole myriad of other legal problems. I just kind of not.
Sports, not just.
I don't know how we go, I just have a really hard time going down that path, but I don't think we actually
So Penny,
support the co-curricular activities. I've always wanted to provide more support for them.
Can I just point out that currently squash is a New Canaan High School sport with varsity status? It has a varsity status. We just don't currently fund them because they are not an FCX, CX sport.
Just like ski team.
Ski team, same.
And the crew.
Right, but I think
Well,
that, but I
for-
don't think we have
for
any,
varsity.
I don't think we have any responsibilities currently toward any of the coaches. Like, we don't have, you can get a varsity letter from crew, but we don't have any responsibilities towards any of those coaches. So I just,
I think Penny
I'm
brings
not
up,
quite sure how you do it.
I think Penny brings up a couple, some questions too, because it just opens up more and more questions. So it's important to kind of figure out, maybe, we have categories, so we've got your FCA AC. Okay, too many letters in there. Group, which we currently do, and then we look at how we do the ones that aren't, that are sports related versus other ones that are, and break them down and kind of look to see, and at what level are we looking at? Are you looking at just as the coaching? I do feel that after hearing from Jay about, that Lizette, even though she might be leaving, the squash team's not going to fall apart because she's not the coach, because that was an issue and concern if we need, if there was, that the sport wouldn't be able to continue on. So it's great to get that information. So, I'm leaning more now towards that, say that I do want to support these activities, because I said they're here and now and they need to be looked at, but we should look at them and see in what ways we want to support them and how we categorize different things and see at what point do they come up for financial support.
And can I just add, so,
Yes, Jen?
whichever way this turns out tonight, are we all in sync that we want to try to look at policy? And if so,
Yeah.
who takes that on?
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's something that we do need to have, the same way we have our committees or subcommittees. I think that might perhaps fit under, I don't know, we can see. I think we need to
Is it
investigate
Jean?
that.
Is it the one-man show?
Also, you should address.
But the
I'll
committee
help you.
hasn't decided the priority of doing the regulatory, the mandatory ones, or the high priority ones, et cetera. By the way, coming back to this again, though, we have a problem here, policy and also funding to support the activity we would like to. But I am very hesitant to put in $20,000 when it could be $60,000 that's required, and we don't know how it's going to be controlled, et cetera. And I just don't think it's right to say, okay, here's $20,000, which may be taken away anyway. And I understand the principle, and we're sending a flag up that we support you. I think the discussion here says we support you. That's been established. Everyone says we support this attempt to get funding for these needs. But something about like we had a slam said the other day, if we're going to do it, let's do it right, so to speak. This is not doing it right to just say $20,000, not knowing if we're going to have to give it half to this person, one quarter here, and they're all going to say it's not enough anyway. And we have to recognize some sports and not others, or some activities and not others even in this, without any definition or guidelines. Anyway, to me, it's enough said, but I'm ready to
Okay,
vote.
are we-
The last comment I would make is, we put things in our budgets that don't get used often. We put into our budget a pool rental for this year that hasn't been used.
No, it was given back, it was cut
Right,
last year.
But we put things,
It was
listen,
cut.
we don't
Given
use
back.
our whole budget every year. So we have money left over at the end of every year, and we give it back to the town. There are things in our budget that don't get used. So to put in an extra $20,000, and if we couldn't come to a policy in 7 months, A, shame on us, and B, then we can always give the money back. But if we don't put the money in the budget to begin with, then we don't have, we can say all we want, how we really love the idea and want to support it, but if we don't put the money in, we're not really supporting it.
Are we ready now to move for the vote? Is there anyone who, any further questions or comments before we do that? To vote yes would mean that you are in favor of it. To vote no would be you're not in favor of it, of the $20,000. Those people who are in favor of that, please signify by raising your hands. That's 3 that we have. Those people who are not in favor of it, then no, will you please raise your hands? I think that from all this discussion, though the vote went not the way that you wish for it to go, there's enough interest that certainly during the year we will pick this up. And I think there's enough discussion about it that we can work out the questions that have been raised tonight, and to hopefully be able to find this as something that we can help and nurture this group on. By all means, I feel, just what's been said here tonight, we want this to be something that is successful, and we'd like to make sure that we plan and make it that way. And that will take time, and it will take people to volunteer, and not poor Jean sitting there doing the whole thing of the policy. So when we'll do a call and see if there are people that are able to do that and give their time, and also to work with the group. Now we'll go back to the original part of the agenda where we're talking about the rest of the, yes, of the budget, the operating budget. Is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up about the operating budget? Any questions about that or anything you want to say? Dr. Litzy or about the rest of the budget? All right.
If there's no other discussion, then we just would need a,
Yes, we've had one. It was
Motion.
moved, it was first moved and seconded by Mr. Gress and Ms. Padula, respectively, on January 5th, 2015. The move was to approve the 2015-16 operating budget of $84,809. Excuse me, 84 million, excuse me, thank you. 84 million, I don't read those numbers often in my checking account. $84,809,121. All those who are in favor of that, please signify by raising your hands. And that is no, okay, that is 8 of us. Those that are not in favor, please raise your hand. That's 1 for that. The next action would be on number 2 item, and that is to move to approve the 2015-16 capital facilities budget of $12,345,000. Is there any discussion on that before we vote?
so if I can say a couple of
Yes,
words about this budget, and we have some experts here to answer some questions about this budget as well. The capital facilities budget includes the proposal for the Saks Auditorium. The option 2 is in that number now, and it also includes a new item that we haven't discussed, Security Phase 2, which refers back to the executive session that we had in the spring with Mike Handler. And after speaking with Mike, speaking with Joanne Rocco, who chairs our Crisis Advisory Board, we felt it was important to keep this initiative moving forward as well. It's also, as you know, we applied for and received a state reimbursement grant for security initiatives that will reimburse a little bit over 20% of the costs. So that number that you see in the budget itself, which is in the back of the new handouts that you received tonight, page 134. 124, on page 124, the first section of it is district and includes that security phase 2. I do, though, want to just take a moment to talk about the option 2 of the Saks Auditorium Building Committee that was presented last week, and we've had quite a few discussions about since then. In the discussions that we've had, it's been important for us to remember that Saks, when it was renovated in 1997, was built for 1,200 students, and we're currently at 1,292, and the enrollment projections forecast will be going up to over 1,400, and that will likely remain consistent from there going forward. In addition, over the past few years, we've added important new programming at the middle school, including STEM, Mandarin, a learning center, and a reading intervention lab, all of which take space. Since the renovation, we've converted rooms such as team meeting rooms, offices, the teacher's dining room, and storage areas into much-needed instructional space. And even this upcoming year, as we look to expand our 7th grade faculty due to the enrollment changes, we're converting 2 computer labs into regular classrooms to house those 2 new teachers. Even with these changes and the creative ideas and thinking that's been happening through the years, there's still a strong likelihood we'll need a few additional classrooms to meet the enrollment and programmatic needs at Saks going forward. The Saks Auditorium Building Committee, following its charter, looked only at the auditorium and some surrounding classrooms. Option 2, which was presented at the last meeting, adds some much-needed instructional space, as much as was reasonable given the charge of the auditorium committee. It focuses on the visual and performing arts while also providing a couple of classrooms. However, a larger program review has not been performed, as it was beyond the scope of the Auditorium Building Committee. Therefore, I've directed the staff to begin reviewing the programmatic needs at Saks to determine if, were option 2 to be completed, it would meet our needs, or due to programmatic needs and enrollment changes, additional classroom space would still be required. If additional classroom space would still be required, I feel it's important that the board know this in order to factor it into decision-making. Recommend the board direct the Saks Auditorium Building Committee to work with the administration and SLAM, the architects who presented last week, and they're here tonight, to look at this option to determine if option 2 will meet the needs of Saks for the foreseeable future, or if a modification of the proposal going forward would enable it to do so. This is not proposed to be a full-blown review of all space needs at Saks, which would be a more costly and time-consuming process. Rather, it's a targeted review of space and program needs to determine if additional classroom space, which we've been told could be constructed in the northwest portion of the campus, would also be necessary. Essentially, the administration and the auditorium committee would be looking to see if there was an option 2A or an option 3 that could cost-effectively provide needed instructional space for the VPA, as well as general classrooms to accommodate for additional students and expanding programs. We don't want to finish the Saks Auditorium renovation project, then have to turn around and request another $1 million for portables on the site. At least we don't want to do so without making that decision in advance as a board. Penny, as the chair of the auditorium committee, you may have other thoughts you'd like to add to that as well. And as I mentioned before, both Jean Terone and Kent Morehart are here tonight with us from SLAM to answer some questions and to help our discussion along.
I would just say, I think this is a good proposal. As the auditorium committee, we really restricted what we looked at just to the area of the auditorium and the surrounding classrooms, and I think that option 2 is a wonderful option, and I think it would provide 4 basically flexible spaces, large flexible spaces, given that we could return the audit with the additional storage, we could actually make the auditorium a more teachable, teacher-friendly space. That said, in working with the staff at Saks, it became clear that there are other space needs. We were able to add, we tried to add 2 classrooms in the courtyard, and that was we thought that was too cost prohibitive to look at, so we took it out as an option. So I think that this would be a very a good endeavor. I think it would be kind of a continuation of the feasibility study. And we have our Jean Terone and Kent Morehart here from SLAM to answer any questions you might have about this possibility. I did want to go over a little bit the schedule that we're going to have to go through for approvals. At some point in the next few months, we're going to have to go back to the town bodies and get design funds to actually design the option that we all agree on. And then we'll have to, once we have that, we'll have to go back to the town bodies again in the fall, in September and October, to ask them to actually fund the full amount of the project. So we could tee it up, so we could bid it out next January or February. So that would be, we'll be going through the town bodies, I think, twice to get first the design funds and then to get the remainder of the funds for the project. But I think it's important that we know as a Board of Ed, this is the project that we're all behind.
Yes, Deanna.
I just have a question. So if we, because I think it's prudent, I think Scott asked a very good question at the last board meeting about, sort of, is this what you really need, Greg? And as we look to maybe a third option, would we add members to the committee? Because I see sort of it more of a building project as opposed to just an auditorium project at this point. And there may be, members of the district staff that would be important to be adding to that. I'm sure Greg could identify some people, or Jill, that would be sort of important to be looking at that space from an overall curricular standpoint, thing. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
We've had some preliminary discussions about that, and indeed, yes, if the scope did widen, then we would likely look. Again, we're not talking about a full-blown program review, which can be very costly and take 6 months or longer. We are working with so the clock is ticking on the auditorium itself. We know that that's a project that needs to occur. And so the costs the savings that are afforded by trying to combine some of other construction, if need be, with that just makes good sense. So we're going to keep that moving forward. But yes, we have looked at and discussed briefly widening the scope of that committee and changing the membership a bit.
Yes, Penny.
I guess you might want to, we had some conversations with Jean and Kent that this might come up tonight, and they would be willing to talk about kind of what would be involved in that type of effort by the building committee, and the types of questions that would be analyzed if one of you wanted to address that.
Good evening. Kent Morehart from the SLAM Collaborative. Some of the things we talked about analyzing would be to expand the scope of the feasibility study to look at the northwest quadrant of the site as a more appropriate location for a classroom addition, since it's in the vicinity of other classrooms. And we're not quite sure on what the count would be for the number of classrooms. And that would be, we would be looking to the administration to guide us on that in the absence of a full programming study. Part of that study would be to look at the building in total with regard to certain code components as far as plumbing fixture count, number of toilets and so forth that you need to accommodate the added space, among a few other things. Make sure that there's nothing in the ground in that vicinity, just make sure that it's feasible to entertain an addition in that location. And then we could also look at paring back a little bit on option 2 as was presented last week to right size those VPA spaces in the context of adding however many classrooms we may add in the other addition. So it's kind of a balancing act. We'd look at maybe taking a little bit back and adding a little over there. And I think it would be more appropriately placed, quite honestly. I think we were a little bit challenged because of the narrow scope of our initial charge to add general classrooms in the vicinity of the music wing that it just seemed a little bit out of place. So I think it might be a little bit more appropriately placed in a new classroom bar. So we could look at that. And do you have anything to add?
Yeah, the only other thing that we would.
Jean, just
Could you go to the
have to go to
microphone?
the microphone.
Thanks.
Yeah, the only other thing that we would study too is just the square foot analysis per student. The state requires us to kind of look at the size of the building relative to the number of students you have, and how does that affect your reimbursement. So that data would also be presented at the time, just to give you an idea of what does that all mean financially for you as well. And then the last part of it would be just like we did for you before, is to look at the project as one large project, however it forms itself, to see, is the addition a separate project, or is it part of a larger project where you can get that economy of scale by doing it all at once. And it's still certainly within any contractor's reasonable expectations to do that in roughly the same amount of time that we were proposing for the renovation in addition to the VPA program.
Can you just remind me, what's the expected time of the renovation?
Well,
and remediation?
the option 2 that we had presented was about 11 months. So if we scale back option 2 a little bit, even if you don't scale back option 2 and do, let's say, a 4 or 6 classroom addition, that still can occur in the same amount of time because they're in different locations. The work can almost run concurrently there as well. And the other factor is, whether it's a 1 or 2 story addition has a tremendous impact on, the financial cost. So there's a lot of things that needs to be looked at.
Other questions?
Well, no, I was just coming just to kind of follow up in terms of the process of this. So we're looking to give, as the Board of Ed, the charge to the SACS Building Committee to take a look to see, make sure that all of our programmatic needs are going to be met after this SACS Auditorium proposal. And that we start with getting the designer concepts going. And if at some time we realize that we do need to do this extension, then we look at it and add that or make adjustments.
I honestly think, I take direction here from people might have more, but I'm just thinking this through. We're a town-appointed committee. So I think what the Board of Ed can do is say that they think this is the appropriate direction we should take. We're presenting to the Board of Selectmen tomorrow, and I think that the charge might be to the Board of Selectmen and a discussion with Rob about how we actually go about it. I mean, if that's something that the Board of Ed wants and it's something that, the community decides, we'd probably be renamed the SACS Building Committee a little bit, which if you end up just doing the auditorium, it's fine too. But I think we would need to have some sign off by our first selectman and some guidance about that.
Yes, Jen.
I just wanted to say, we know that this auditorium is 58 years old, right? And we had renovations in 97, 2000 to SACS, and I'm under the assumption that we were told that 5 to 7 years we'd be doing the auditorium, and it's now 15 years. And we're in a situation now, I've been quite involved at Saks, and every year the auditorium gets pushed out because there's never any money, which, you know, it's a lot of money. I get it. Well, now we have no choice due to the current situation at Saks, right, with the auditorium. And then we now also have an enrollment issue. You know, and like this enrollment committee that was established, you know, is the goal of the enrollment capacity study committee is using data to be responsive to enrollment trends, to see how student enrollment and programs might impact the capacity for schools as we move forward long term. So we're thinking long term. You know, I know from what Penny said or what Brian said, this was built for 1,200 people. We now have added programs. We have no teacher lounges anymore. We're taking away our computer labs. We basically have no offices. We're having super teams because we have so many kids. Like, I just feel like this is the time that we need to take advantage of the fact that we do need to bring in, you know, we need help with our auditorium, and take advantage of this time and not make a mistake and look back 5 years from now and be paying $2 million more, you know, to try. I mean, we are busting at the seams at Saks. And I just feel like, I mean, I love the option 3. I think it's, you know, I love option 2. I think it looks great, but I think we really need to evaluate where the classrooms are needed. I mean, I see the kids, and like, I just can't imagine like going to math way over there. I mean, I'm sure it can be worked out, but I just think it's something that I'm excited about this. I think it's a great idea to look at the possibilities of adding, you know, maybe cutting back on the music area and enlarging on the northwest corner, you know, to make more sense so that we don't have the stresses of the classrooms. And I think, you know, keeping that number, that placeholder, so we have the ability to do what we need to do to make this the right decision.
Scott?
I absolutely agree with everything Jen just said. I think we all know what the outcome of the study is going to be. We need more classrooms. Everybody knows we need more classrooms. And so I have 2 sort of thought processes. One is, you know, in option 2, we've built the STEM room next to the choral room. I don't know how soundproof we can make these things, but if I'm trying to do math and engineering and whatnot, having the 5th grade chorus in the room next to me, having heard the 5th grade chorus when I had 5th graders is a challenge at best. That said, I think that there needs to be a look at how can we best, if we're going to look at this northwest corner, we're going to put classrooms in the northwest corner, and we're going to move some things over there, and it becomes possible then to keep the footprint of the building in the choral area the same, it's going to save us a huge amount of money in that area that's going to allow us to do the things we need to do in the other area. I could sooner get behind a proposal that solves our problems, and even if it costs more than the $10 million, not dramatically more, but if it costs a little bit more, I could sooner get behind that proposal than a $10 million proposal to do the performing arts wing. So the other problem that we all know that we have is we've got this Damoclesian sword hanging over us, which is we have no auditorium. So in terms of a more perfunctory way to look at our budget, rather than put in a number of $10 million and approve number 2, that doesn't make sense to me. Now, I don't know what does, and I would defer to all the rest of the board, but do we put in a number that says we're going to take a bigger look at this, or do we put in a number that says we're going to start working on the auditorium right away? The political reality probably is, just knowing the town, that if we went ahead and did something now and came back a year and a half from now and said, oh, we need classrooms, the appetite's going to be far smaller. So to go about it and to do it right and to do it all at once is the way to do it. That just presents the problem of what do we put in our capital budget. Because to just throw $10 million and say that we're all behind option 2 doesn't make a lot of sense to me either.
So you're looking, yes, Deanna.
And I know Penny won't say anything about numbers, but I think, I think the 10-1 number is sort of a floor right now. I mean, it's I can't envision most of us have probably done some sort of construction. It's going to be 10-1 or more if we look at expanding north of the campus. So I can't imagine putting anything less than 10-1 in the budget for Saks. And with the discussion with town saying it may be more once we really evaluate it, but it certainly is going to be no less. Because I don't think it's good to have put expectations out there that it's only 5.3. You know, I mean, then we look like we're not being, we're not putting it all out there for them. So I mean, at a very minimum, we're going to need 10-1. So why wouldn't we put that in the capital budget to start? And that's the committee's charge, is to sell the upsell if we need it.
So Penny, you had your hand up also.
Well, I mean, I think the board understands it, but, it's just a placeholder number, and the reason I said about the approval process is this is going to end up getting vetted twice by the town bodies. They're all going to vote on it. They're all going to have a chance, because we're going to need a round of funding to get our design funds, and then we're going to need a round, the final round, which would be in September and October of this year, because we want to keep it moving quickly because the auditorium is off service. To have them vote on it in full. So to me, we don't have another number now other than the $10 million number to put in there. So that's the only one available. So that would be the one that I would suggest. It's not giving anybody any money to spend. It's just kind of a statement of the board that they're behind the bigger project.
Just if I may. I think it's important to take the process one step at a time. And as where we are right now in this process, the known numbers that we have is the 10-1. We need to look a little more closely now at the whole the classrooms and the facility in that way to see what those other needs are. We can sort of jump at it, and so maybe we can come close with a number, but I've heard numbers, everything from 4 to 12 to this, that, and there are different ways to look at this. I think that's important for us to take the time to really understand what those needs are, and then to share them back with the board so that we can sort of take that next step. But I worry about skipping steps along the way as we go through this. I think this is the next step for us, and then the next, or for the board, and then the next step would be to gather that other information and to share it back. And then there may be a different decision that's made at that point, but I hesitate thinking differently until we have some more information in front of us.
Okay. Yes, Jean.
So what I'm hearing is that this is not literally a vote to say we think we can do it for 10-1, but this is a vote to say, do we want to fix the auditorium, or fix the auditorium and also address the problem of the burgeoning enrollment and in fact, that even without the extra enrollment, we're already under-spaced, as you well, not right-spaced. But it's not really a question about what do we think is the right dollar amount. This is just our best guesstimate at this point in time, and indeed it could be more. But that's what we're being voted on, not to put a cap at 10-1, but just to endorse the solving two problems or one problem. Is that correct? It seems to be that's what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay, and that basis, I'm happy proceeding, knowing that we're not sending a signal that, hey, this is a 10-1 job, that this is a current estimate, and it could change. I'm ready to support.
Anybody else?
So can I
Comments?
ask a
Jen?
question then? So how, when we're doing our budget process, how does that work? We just don't put anything in? I mean, how does that work? What do you put
I
in?
think it's there, but it's a marker, and
So you're going to
people
put,
realize
we're still
it's-
going to put in the 10, but that doesn't make sense.
I
If we
think it
just
means
said
we're
what we
gonna-
said.
It's our best estimate is what Penny is saying, and it's you say a marker.
Typically, I mean, in my when I was on the high school building committee, at some point you divorce yourself for the Board of Ed. I mean, we're a town committee now, so and as hard as it is to cut that umbilical cord, I think that the town committee is going to have to go forward on its own and ask for these funding from the town bodies once we've finished this kind of feasibility, so we can say, this is what we think the project could be. I mean, obviously, we'll bring it back to the Board of Ed, so the Board of Ed can see if the Board of Ed agrees first before we go to the town bodies. But, and then the building committee gets funding for it separately. Now, I don't know how that works with, that was certainly the regime when we did the high school building committee project.
So you're comfortable recommending keeping the placeholder at 10-1 in the budget?
Yes.
Does that answer your question, Jen?
Yeah.
Okay. Allison?
Yeah, I think what the problem is the due diligence process isn't matching up with the budget schedule. So, I don't think any of us would want to have to come up with a number tonight if we didn't have to, but we have to. And so I think what you're asking us to do really is to say, we need to put a number into the capital budget tonight. Right now, the best number we have is the 10,132. I think we're acknowledging that the 2A, I don't want to speak for anybody, but it looks like we're potentially acknowledging that scenario 2A is our best scenario at this point in time. We're also acknowledging that it's not going to meet the needs of our increased enrollment over the next couple of years. So we're asking the committee, or a new committee, or a continuation of this committee, to continue looking at this project with the additional lens maybe on the increased enrollment. So I think really what you're looking for is the 10,132 tonight as part of our facilities budget, because we don't have a better number than that. So I agree with you. It seems, on one hand, it seems a little crazy to put a number in that we know probably won't be the right number. On the other hand, we know that it will not be probably any less than the 10,132. And I think we've probably discussed it enough that everybody knows that this is a temporary number, and we're going to do the best we can, and we'll have better numbers as we move forward.
Yes.
But we have to put a number down today.
Yes, Deanna?
I just procedurally have a question. Will it, I mean, it's a capital budget anyway, so it's a separate budget, but does it get separated out some other way because it's a building project, so it becomes a whole different entity itself? This is where I
Yes.
think there's.
Nancy is saying yes.
Yeah.
I'll let
Yes.
her.
Yes.
Okay.
This will take on a life of its
Okay.
own. Clearly, as the board brings forward to the funding bodies the project itself and your recommended amount, then depending on the direction, whether it's 2 or 2A or 3 or whatever, again, as more information is gathered, then that project can become something different and change its identity.
Yes.
So I guess that begs two questions. One is, can we just put a TBD number in there? Are we better off not putting a number at all on it? And then my second question would be, is this tantamount to a tacit approval of option 2? Because I'm very okay saying, yeah, throw $10 million in there. I find it a little ironic that we're willing to take a number like $10 million with no policy or no, but anyway, that I'm okay with that. But I wouldn't want that to be, I wouldn't want that to suggest that I think that option 2 is a great way to go on its own. So how do I vote? How do I feel? I mean, if we said, hey, 10 million's great because we know we're going to look at it again, that's great.
I think the answer is that we're coming back to you.
Okay,
If the town bodies decide that they agree with this approach, with the Board of Ed's approach, then we're going to do this study, and the first group we're going to come back to is the Board of Ed, and we're going to say, this is what we've got. And then you are going to be able to say whether or not you support it and think it's a good value. We'll have some sort of very high, 30,000 foot high level cost number like we've had. So, and then so yes, we're coming back.
Does that help you, Scott?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Yes, Sherry.
I just want to say I agree with Scott's point, though, and also I think Jean put it really well, and it's worth reiterating that I think fundamentally tonight, I would just want to make sure the headline last week was that we kind of, or except for Scott last week, we were all in favor of option 2, which was in effect an auditorium and VPA classroom expansion. I think fundamentally what I hear everyone here tonight saying is that we're in favor of fixing the auditorium and a classroom expansion. And I just want to make sure that's the headline versus, turns out Board of Ed doesn't know how much this is going to cost. I mean, we are kind of shifting the approach a bit in that we are taking a step back to look at the overall needs of SACs and the overall classroom capacity issues and how to best utilize any square footage that we add. And I think that's an important distinction, and I think Jean said it well, and I just thought it was worth restating because that really should be the headline.
I think it's no regrets. We want to make sure that when this is finished, we're happy.
Right.
We like what it is. The teachers like it. The students like it. That's what we're hoping to
The
have.
right sizing of the building.
The right sizing of the building's a good way to describe it. Are there any other parts of any more discussion on this? And would someone like to reframe it for us? Yes, Allison.
I actually don't have a question on the auditorium, but I just, on the facilities budget. Just a question to Nancy, actually, on the capital facilities, and it has to do with security phase 2. Can you just explain to us why this is in our budget? Because I know we worked so hard for phase 1 to make sure it wasn't in our budget, that it was a town, it was a town initiative, town project. So I'm just wondering what the discussion was around why we put phase 2 into our budget.
Sure, and the decision was made in conversation with Mike Handler, who's been talking with, at the town level, that this was the way for us to move it forward, that it wasn't going to go forward as a special appropriation. So for us to keep it going, this was the best way to do it. Would have rather had it go the way that Security Phase 1 did, but it just had to do with feedback from those discussions.
Thank you.
Any other questions about this motion? Sounds like we're ready perhaps to vote. Those in favor of moving to approve the 2015-16 capital facilities budget of $12,345,000, will you please raise your hands? And that is a unanimous vote. Thank you both very much for the input you provided with us all along the way with the committee as well as tonight. It's been very helpful, and you've worked under time pressures that are unbelievable, so we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
We should have a motion for each.
Hazel?
Yes.
We should probably have a separate motion for each of the items 1, 2, 3, and 4. So even though we all just voted to approve the capital funding, the capital facilities budget at 12,345, we didn't have a motion to approve it. So somebody needs.
Oh,
So I'd be happy to move to approve the
Yes,
capital
all right,
budget
okay.
at $12,345,000.
And then, okay, second is Sherry. Okay, now all those in favor of that motion, please. It's unanimous. Thank you.
And similarly with the other items, we should have separate motions.
Let's do.
Anyone that's interested in this, we're presenting to the Board of Selectmen tomorrow morning at 10. Would be delighted to have your support.
Where?
At the police
The police
station,
training room.
I believe that's where we are.
Okay. Number 3. Is there a motion to approve the 2015-16 capital technology budget of $989,008? Okay, motion for that. A second. Jean? Now, discussion. That's what we did. Discussion on that motion?
This budget can be found on page 123 of the revised packet you received.
And the only change that you see on that is we included under the 16-17 year a $200,000 estimate for updating our TV studio at the high school. You had heard from the principal and staff about the need for that and moving from analog to digital, and that a lot of the equipment, you have to do it all at once. You can't pair up old equipment with the newer technology. So under 15-16, no changes, but 16-17, you see that 200,000. Again, asterisked underneath, under the other capital projects. So that's the only change to that, to the whole budget.
Nancy? Maybe my eyesight isn't as good. There's also an asterisk at the bottom for 2015-16 and for 2017-18, but I don't see in the dollar amounts what those asterisks belong to.
If you go far over to the left, other capital projects, which is 3 lines up.
Yes?
So 59.8.
Got it.
Is the first 2 conversions of the labs into mobile labs and regular classrooms. Then if you move over to 17, 18, we're anticipating that we will have to take the last 2 labs and again use mobile technology and convert them into classrooms. So that's what those 3 items
I
are
got
referencing.
the individual dollar amounts are not asterisked. It's the whole line which is
Yeah.
asterisked effectively. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? There being no other questions, we'll move the decision, move the question here, move the motion.
It was moved.
Right, it's
Now
now
go
we'll vote. Now we'll vote. I mean, you go to the finish.
The
of it.
capital budget.
Okay, all those in favor? And those, it's all a unanimous vote. Number 4, we already have the move to approve 2015-16 capital fleet replacement budget of $176,000. Would you want to comment on that, or we'll do it? Let's move it the second. Okay, move it? Yes, motion to, thank you. Second? Thank you, Sangeeta. Now, discussion and would you want to set that into motion?
It's, well, this hasn't changed since our last discussion, but we can certainly, it's on page,
We're replacing vehicles that have been here for a long time.
127. Yep, 127, it's a 5-year vehicle replacement, fleet replacement schedule for your discussion and consideration.
Any discussion on that? Yes, Jean?
I again strongly suggest looking at the Subaru Outbacks as 4-wheel drive vehicles that get good mileage. They're not Priuses, but they're substantially larger than the Outbacks that have preceded the 2015 year.
And actually, after the last board meeting, and as the question was raised by several board members, there is only one vehicle currently that is transporting less than 4 students. So the size of those vehicles really are sized appropriately because remember, you've got a driver and you have at least one aide dealing with those youngsters. And they do multiple runs, by the way. So, but there's only one vehicle in the entire fleet that is only transporting one child. So it kind of changes the perspective when you actually have Roy giving me the right information.
Well, my comment was kind of like Scott's comment on the auditorium and the capital thing, that it wasn't a directive or anything, or you can proceed with the budget. Use your discretion, of course.
And of course, Roy is here. If you had further questions, he just fed me the right information. I didn't have it last time.
Are there any other questions about the fleet, the replacement of the fleet, the cars? There being no others, then I think that we should then go to the vote. It's been,
That we approve the
yes, the
item,
2015.
the 2015-16 capital fleet replacement budget of $176,000.
All those in favor? Oh, a second first. Second first. Scott, thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that's unanimous also. So we've completed and approved the proposed budget for 2015-16. Thank you, everyone. Moving now to the district calendar. And we have already had a move to approve the 2016-17 district calendar, which was first moved and seconded by Ms. West and Ms. Carlson, respectively, on January 5th, 2015. Is there now a second motion to approve this calendar? And then we'll have discussion. Okay, first, is there a second move? Jen, thank you. Is there a second for that motion? Thank you. And now we'll do discussion. Is there any discussion? Have there been any comments that have come in or concerns?
Calendar, right?
Yes.
It's already been
district
moved
calendar.
and seconded. We don't need to move it and second it again. So we just need to discuss and vote.
We'll discuss, that's what we're doing,
Yeah, but,
discussing.
okay, but we just made a motion again, which we don't need to do, but that's fine.
Discussion?
So just to share what's happened since the first presentation of this back on the 5th. I did have an opportunity to meet with the PFA and PTC presidents, and we talked about it a little bit, had some feedback. They were equally excited about the possibility of starting in September. So I want to share that. And we moved the elementary conferences a little bit so that they were all in the same week, where they were broken up over a weekend in the initial. But beyond that, felt that it was a calendar that's consistent with our calendars year to year, and they liked the starting in September and ending on, I think it was June 16th. So it seems to work out well. That
Any
was
other-
that was the only feedback I've gotten. It has been on our website. So I don't know if you've heard anything else.
Anything from anybody, comments or questions that have concerned you? There being no comments or questions, we have moved and seconded now, and all those in favor of the calendar as it is, please signify by raising your hands, and it's unanimous. That means it passes. We're now open for comments from the public. Is there anyone who would like to provide us with comments?
We'll do announcements.
Oh, it's missing. I'm sorry, before we do, I don't see anybody. Announcements? There's no rushing, okay. Announcements and future meetings. We have heard that tomorrow is the meeting with the Board of Selectmen on the 21st at 10 o'clock in the police training room, and all people are welcome to come to join us there.
Yes. And just two quick announcements. One, that today was the first day of the second semester for students at the high school. Congratulations to all of those students for making it to halfway point, especially our seniors. And on a more somber note, I just want to share that Kay Timmis, who was been with us since the 1970s as a substitute teacher, she passed away unexpectedly this weekend. So just to acknowledge Kay's contribution to us for decades, and that she leaves a very fond legacy here at the high school and throughout the district for the work that she's done.
Thank you. One last opportunity for anyone who would like to speak. Seeing no one wants to speak, is there a motion to adjourn? Sangeeta?
Motion to adjourn?
And a second? Jen? All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone.